Those of you familiar with my work will know by now that not only do I point out repeatedly that it is the simplest, most foundational knowledge that human culture has never been given, discovered, or identified for itself to date, rather than the most complex and mysterious knowledge. But that not having identified the simplest truths that come before and cause the more complex truths means that we have, from the start, built all of the understandings that we do currently hold to about life and human reality on top of a hole in our knowledge. This is true for our culture, and it is true for each of us as an individual. We have, from the start, built all of the understandings that we do currently hold to about life and human reality on top of a hole in our knowledge, on top of a mistake. A truth we believe is true that isn't true. Which means that you, being a human being in this human world of ours, which has not so far figured out foundational truth, have, from the start, built all of the understandings that you do currently hold to about life and human reality on top of a hole in your knowledge, on top of a mistake. I was, for a while, taken aback by the unwillingness of pretty much anybody I talk to feel impacted by me pointing this out. Especially when I do actually provide the foundational truths that we have been missing all this time. But time gets you used to whatever time repeatedly gives you. I'm currently at the stage where I am only taken aback by the unwillingness of pretty much everybody who encounters my work to even be mildly interested in it, even be casually curious. And I don't think I'm going to remain taken aback by this for long either. You see, it is nothing to do with intelligence. Foundational truth is simple enough to be understood by anybody. Otherwise, it is not foundational truth. That is literally how simple foundational truth has to be. The truth is that you all are intelligent enough to understand foundational truth. But you instinctively react against that which goes directly opposite to the best understanding you have come to agree upon with yourself. If the truth, the actual truth, is opposite to what you are attached to believing, you will react negatively and defensively to the truth when you hear it. And of course, the actual foundational truths of existence are an inversion of the hole in our knowledge that we have long since built our version of reality on. Or in other words, we have wired ourselves to be allergic to the truth. You have wired yourself to be allergic to the truth. Our mathematics, our sciences, our religions, our popular cultures, all of them allergic to knowing that which is simply so. It is not difficult to understand that what we would build on top of the sure knowledge of the simplest, most foundational truths would be something very different from all that we and our culture has built on top of this hole in our collective understanding. It would be different. It would be cohesive. It would make sense. But in our dependence on what we have built while in error, we have made ourselves afraid of the contradiction of all we have built. Our mathematicians do not want to hear it. Our scientists do not want to hear it. Our religions do not want to hear it. Our philosophers, experts, authorities, celebrities, and ground troops do not want to hear it. You are allergic to the truth, and so you do not wish attention to be brought to it, your own attention or anybody else's. And so, it is not enough that this truth be rejected, argued against. It needs to be ignored completely. It needs to be ignored as definitively as may be. You feel any potential significance this truth may hold for you needs to be diminished to the point where it can enter your ear and just not be heard, pass through your awareness and out again before any of its meaning and implications may be extracted. If you simply tell yourself with authority that this does not affect you, then you naturally give yourself permission to ignore it and thereby hold your life as you have known it so far intact. So here, let's do this again. And I invite you to observe your own performance. Maybe give yourself a score out of 10 for how little meaning you manage to keep yourself from extracting from the following. The reason, the simple, foundational reason for the presence and behaviour of all existence, including the presence and behaviour of you, is that there are truths that cannot not be true. Now, this is the only possible foundational reason for the presence and behaviour of all existence that can actually function. And this makes it the correct answer to the question, why is there something rather than nothing? There is something rather than nothing for the simple, foundational reason that there are truths that cannot not be true. There is no reason that can come before this reason. There simply is not. Me saying this is me identifying the truth that human culture has sought for itself since our beginnings as the human race. The truth that is a direct inversion of its own absence in our understanding of life, the universe, and ourselves. There are truths that cannot not be true is the only reason for our presence and behaviour here that can possibly function. I will give more here to back this statement up, but already, for any coherent thinker, this statement is sound. This statement is devastatingly groundbreaking. There are truths that cannot not be true is the only reason for our presence and behaviour here that can possibly function, which makes it correct. I'm telling you it is correct because nothing else comes remotely close to functioning. Nothing else comes anywhere near. Nowhere near. This is why people don't tend to argue with me, except incoherently, because what I am saying does actually function, and any alternative to that which does function is inherently going to be something other than that which does function. People don't tend to argue with me because they can't coherently do so, because there is no way to argue with the truth and be coherent while you do it. And so they simply decline to engage at all, fall silent, disappear. Take a pause now to check in with yourself. How are you doing on scoring yourself out of 10 for not hearing anything meaningful here? I have already given you the greatest gold, the greatest treasure of understanding you could be given. Did you allow yourself to spot that? Or are you scoring high? Okay, so it's all well and good me telling you that there are truths that cannot not be true is the only reason for our presence and behaviour here that can possibly function. But without any tangible, presentable evidence, really all it amounts to is a collection of words. So no wonder people can be so ready to dismiss what I say and move on. Where are my examples of truths that cannot not be true in action? Well, here is where it does get properly interesting, because here is where we come to understand how non-physical truth can become physical expression of truth. And it's easy to understand. Anybody can understand this. That which we recognize as the physical world, the material realm, we have always needed a non-physical cause for the physical, because simply saying that it was something else that was also physical, that caused physical phenomena to exist, does not answer anything. It does not give us anything approaching the foundational level. The cause of the physical has to be something that is not physical itself. Absolutely has to be, to avoid the paradox of physicality being caused by something that is already physical itself. This is an absolute. This is a truth that cannot not be true. This is the unavoidable, inescapable truth that we have managed to avoid for ourselves, but through no fault of our own. And our inability to conceive of anything at all, that is both not physical, but still effectively real in some tangible sense, that has been our blind spot. That has been our blind spot. It doesn't matter what title of authority you have here, awarded to you by others or by yourself. You have been as subject to that blind spot as everybody else. We have all been subject to it together, myself included. Because how could anything at all, be not physical and yet still have some demonstrable physical effect? That just sounds like crazy talk, does it not? Surely it's impossible for me to give clear examples of this kind of thing. And surely if I did manage to pull off such an impossibility, then you would be incredibly impressed. No? Well, I can give clear examples of this truth that resides in our blind spot. But it is very unlikely, statistically speaking, that you will be impressed. So let's take a look at my first tangible example of a truth that cannot not be true, that is not a physical thing in and of itself, but which is effectively part and parcel of all of the physical expression of existence. Well, the very simplest that I can conceive of, which makes it the most foundational, is there are 3 spatial dimensions. There are 3 spatial dimensions. This is a truth that cannot not be true. Why are there 3 spatial dimensions? Because it is just plain old impossible that there could ever not be. You could immerse yourself in theoretical research for the rest of your life, and you simply would not identify any possible situation in which there would not be 3 spatial dimensions, regardless of what the physical stuff inhabiting those spatial dimensions is doing. This is a truth that cannot not be true, and perhaps the most foundational of all, and the most foundational of objective truths are the ones that affect all of us all the time. And us finding ourselves perpetually inhabiting 3 spatial dimensions does indeed affect all of us all the time. So I have just demonstrated that there is such a thing as a truth that cannot not be true, a non-physical truth that applies to all physicality, to all physical expression of truth. This should be astonishing to you. It really should. And yet, it is far more likely that you will react much as a person responds to learning how a magic trick is performed, with disappointment. Oh, is that all it is? And forget about it and get on with your day. Because, well, it just turned out to be so obvious. But this is the thing. The simplest truths that cannot not be true. Of course, they have to be obvious. They are the simplest truths that cannot not be true. How could they not be obvious? It is our continued failure to identify the very most simple and obvious truths that has caused us to believe that foundational truth must be anything but the very most simple and obvious thing. And so our blind spot has held strong throughout the entirety of human history. So, what else do we have in the way of examples of breathtakingly simple truths that cannot not be in effect? Another example of a truth that cannot not be true, one that is foundationally simple and therefore always in effect, is that one moment follows another. Because truths that cannot not be true absolutely must take place within the 3 spatial dimensions that simply cannot not be there, they must therefore take place relative to each other in spatial terms. And so, truth over here must iterate relative to truth that is iterating over there, without any truths in between, or anywhere at all for that matter, being broken. One moment of the relative iteration of truth follows another because, again, it simply cannot not do that. This relative iteration of truths within the 3 spatial dimensions basically amounts to the absolutely required balancing and rebalancing of truths that are absolutely incapable of being out of balance with each other. This is what time is. The relative truths that have already iterated, they have already iterated. And those that are yet to iterate, they are yet to iterate. This could not be simpler to understand, and it affects all of us all the time. As for mysterious relativistic effects when it comes to our relative experiences of time and the spatial dimensions. They are mysterious relativistic effects. Another truth that cannot not be true about being part of the eternal living unified field is that there are always going to be mysterious relativistic effects. How could there ever not be? It's like asking, how could there ever not be 3 spatial dimensions? Truths that cannot not be true. They hold true in all locations, at all times, at all scales, because they are truths that cannot not be true. Which means existence is infinite and has an infinite resolution. It is an infinitely high definition, moving 3-dimensional image that is infinite in size and depth. And the perpetual and perfect interactions of infinite infinities can only result in inevitable, mysterious, relativistic effects. It would be astonishing if they did not. So, how are you doing with your score out of 10? Everything I have talked about here so far affects you completely and utterly, 100% of the time. And everything I have talked about here so far runs contrary to all that is held to be true by all human culture all around the world, upstairs, downstairs, and in my lady's chamber. It runs contrary to all your culture holds as true, whether you realize it or not, and yet it is the truth. What does that register on your score of refusing to process meaning? If you're not familiar with my work, I encourage you to become familiar with it. And if you are familiar with it, I encourage you to become even more familiar with it. Because over the course of it, so far I have identified what the definition of the word number is, something never done before in human history. I have identified that in physical terms, there can be no such thing as absolute nothing or less than 0. I have solved the problem of finding square roots of negative numbers, another thing that has never been done before. And I have also identified that the cause of consciousness is that objective truth, iterating relative to objective truth, is mechanistically synonymous with non-physical truth being conscious of itself via physical iterative expression. So the truth causes the physical expression, and the experience of the physical expression informs the non-physical truth and its next expression. Objective truth iterating relative to objective truth, being mechanistically synonymous with truth being self-conscious, is the only explanation for consciousness that has been conceived of in human history that functions coherently. And this is simply how it is, because in existential terms, it is only that which is actually truly functioning that even can function. How is your score doing? Over the course of my work, I identified that we are eternal truth in iteration, that we share the one same soul as each other, the same one soul of the entire eternal living unified field, while each of us possesses our own individual and eternal self. While the core of our shared soul is eternally unchanging, our self is eternally in a state of relative change because it just has to be. I do not say we are God. For me, that is a corrupted word. I say that we are the eternal because it is proper and correct for me to do so. And I put an emphasis on the eternal. We are the eternal. You are the eternal. I talk a lot in my videos and MP3s about what it actually does mean to be the eternal as a lived experience, in contrast to the idealizations and misconceptions that have been handed down and evolved over time by our own culture. Eternity is unending truth in iteration. And this iterating of truth is cycles within cycles within cycles. We are truth in never-ending expansion. This causes consciousness, it causes gravity, and it causes periodic bouts of collective amnesia. Each time we expand into a higher order of scale, of self-differentiation than we have occupied before. We are the eternal. We periodically forget who we are and must relearn who we are from scratch. Some of our cycles are small, daily, and even smaller than that. Some of our cycles are large, yearly, and even larger than that. It goes in both directions. I am not saying we are God. I am saying we are the eternal. We never had a choice about being the eternal. We never know fully what is going on. We only ever wish to feel better rather than worse. These also are truths that cannot not be true. Truths that apply to us all of the time. Truths that apply to all of us all the time. truths that apply to you all the time, wherever you are. We are unending consciousness, which makes us both eternally indestructible and eternally sensitive. And yes, that may well sound frightening to you. Wishing it were otherwise does not cause it to be otherwise. Believing it is otherwise does not cause it to be otherwise. But there is no reason or need to wish it were otherwise or believe it is otherwise. My problem, as such, in bringing these truths to us is that if you do take them on board properly for the actual truth that they actually are, it changes your life. And this is what you both desire and fear. Oh shit. You do want your life to change. You just don't want it to change. That's all. Is that too much to ask? This thing that you are afraid of, this change that you fear, it is truly a good thing, a positive thing, a change to be wished for, because it takes us out of making ourselves into food for each other. While we are in the cycle of amnesia, self-polarization, we have this gap within our own comprehension, this empty hole that should be occupied by the foundational knowledge that we are the eternal. And because of this, we feel anything but eternal. And when we feel so mortal and vulnerable as this, we can't help but make ourselves into food for each other. We can't help but be incessantly looking for ways to make the most of others, get the most we can for ourselves out of them, because we feel so sensitive and vulnerable. We feel so threatened. But our true issue as the eternal is not being mortal and vulnerable. It is being eternal and eternally sensitive. And if you problem solve for the wrong one, it does have the most massive effect on you and the quality of your subsequent eternity. It has the greatest impact on you and does completely matter to you on whatever levels of coherency you do have going on. This is real. There are truths that cannot not be true. If you still do not see that, then you will remain incorrect until you do see it. If you do now see that there are truths that cannot not be true, then the rest is ultimately inescapable. And that is the very last reason to wish to try to duck it. Trying to avoid the change, when it's the change that learning the truth brings, basically amounts to you doing what you can to avoid the good, to avoid what feels better to you rather than worse in the long game. And the long game is the one you are in. So please, I invite you to observe your own reaction to all of the truth presented here. Observe your own willingness or unwillingness to know a truth that it is good to know, good for you to know, but that says something different from what you are used to. Observe how interested or not you even are to think about it. Observe how much you are moved to even mention it to others, and how much you are moved to simply not think about it at all. And give yourself a score out of 10 for how well you do with that.